Hello and welcome to another Times Radio question and answer session. And today we're answering questions and comments from our channel members on the frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. Now, I'm Philip Ingram. I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and now global commentator on all matters defence and security. The first question comes from one of our Twitter followers, and that's Danielle, who was interested in the impact everything is happening on the UK defence sector and whether the UK's defence sector is ready to support a war in Europe. And she says it seems that we have strength in some areas, but weaknesses in others, like the need for Sheffield Forgemasters to have to reopen production lines for 155mm artillery barrels, and asks, is the response of the private sector adequate? There's a number of things in there. The response of the private sector will be dictated by the relationship it's got with defence equipment and support, the procurement, the money that's available. Because for many of these private companies, it's not economically viable to keep production lines open just in case something is needed. And this is a relationship that I think UK defence has not managed well in the past. I worked, once I got out of the military, into a defence supplier, and it was always difficult trying to justify to keep production lines open for what were important military components. But if the military had huge stocks that they thought they had enough to survive with, then they wouldn't buy more. And you needed that continuous flow through to justify keeping the production lines open. That, I think, is changing. And I think the Ukraine war has forced British industry and industry across Europe and across the world to sit and look at that and build that relationship up between the Ministry of Defence, Departments of Defence and the defence industrial base to make sure that they're working in harmony. So you're right, it's been good in some places but bad in others. I think it's improving and we're starting to get production levels up, especially of ammunition, to the levels that are needed to sustain a high intensity conflict in Europe. Something people hadn't thought of beforehand. So next question is from Calvin, and he says, as a lot of people seem to do, I can't see this ending well for Ukraine unless Trump has a change of heart. Of course, Donald Trump has just been elected as the president-elect, the 47th president-elect for the United States. And he says, I doubt this will happen. What does Trump's victory mean for Ukraine? A lot of people are thinking that. And if we hear some of the rhetoric that's come out of Trump or his running team that's there, you would think that he is going to try and effectively throw Ukraine to the wolves. There's this perception that he's got a pro-Putin bias, and there are some indicators to suggest that he's got a closer relationship with Vladimir Putin than would be healthy from someone with his political and diplomatic ties as a former president. In the past, he's had off-record meetings where there have been no officials present with Vladimir Putin. That's not something that would be considered usual. However, I think what we're hearing is a lot of rhetoric. If we look at what's happening in reality, the United States are spending billions of dollars, taxpayers' dollars, in US companies creating new US jobs in the defence industrial sector that is being used to manufacture ammunition and equipment to go over to Ukraine. But it's also being used to build up US defences as well. And Donald Trump, whenever he was in beforehand, kept spending on US military and defences higher than we saw during Joe Biden's campaign. And I think Trump is trying and was during his campaigning was focusing on what a lot of his supporters wanted was to try and move away from conflict across the globe. And he turned around and said during his last presidency, he didn't have any conflicts. That I don't think was down to Donald Trump. I think that was down to geopolitical circumstances. But he was claiming victory for that. And he's trying to continue that in the run-up to the election. Now that he's elected, I think we're going to see a little bit of a change. And actually, when we're recording this, the Kyiv Independent has just said that one of the things his team is looking at is potentially saying to Ukraine and saying to Russia that will not allow Ukraine to join NATO for the next 20 years, whilst the United States continues to support Ukraine's efforts against Russia. That will be something that can be used for both sides to try and put influence on them. So we don't really know at the moment. And that's one of the big things with Donald Trump. It's the uncertainty of where his decision making is going to go. I don't think it's going to be as bad for Ukraine as people think, because if he forces Ukraine to the negotiating table to give up territory, that will send a clear indication to Xi Jinping that he could potentially take Taiwan and only ride out the wrath of the international community for a few years before he's allowed back in again. So there's a lot more to this, and we'll be commenting on this, I think, in future question and answer sessions that we have. Joshua turns around and says he sees Trump giving Putin whatever he wants, and be shocked if he delivered a speech saying one critical word of Putin. I go back to what I've just said. There's a lot of what Trump has been saying for his domestic audience. There is definitely a relationship that he's got with Putin that's there that we don't have the full details of. But if we're looking at it in diplomatic terms, and for those in the UK audience, if we're looking at it in yes, Prime Minister terms, if you don't know what yes, Prime Minister is, Google it and have a look. It's hilarious. But he's got a very unhealthy and very brave relationship with Putin. And that is something that we have to watch very closely indeed. But I don't think he's going to throw Ukraine to the wolves. Steve turns around and says, according to Wikipedia, I always take things in Wikipedia with a big pinch of salt, but 900,000 Russians left after the war started. The chances are some are their most valuable citizens, educated citizens, all the rest of it. So isn't 10,000 Korean soldiers a sign of desperation? Well, actually, that's an important point. I think, yes, it is. If Vladimir Putin is having to go to North Korea to get manpower and to get specialist manpower, then he can't generate that himself. If he's having to go to North Korea to get ammunition, artillery ammunition, mortar ammunition, and we've seen pictures, I've seen videos of Russian soldiers preparing mortars and cleaning the rust off them that came in, then it shows that his defence industrial base is not up to standards. And if he's having to go to Iran for his Shahad 136 drones and other capabilities, then his defence industrial base isn't backing things up. So the statements we're hearing from Putin and his team don't match the reality of what we're seeing on the ground. And the reality is, I wouldn't put a North Korean shell into a gun barrel and be anywhere near it whenever someone pulls the lanyard. The chances of it leaving the end of the barrel and not going off in the breech are very remote indeed, I think. And we're seeing that in some of the statistics that are coming through. Mike asks, and this is interestingly a common question that we see. It would be something to see if China grabs land from Russia. And he says, personally, I don't think that would ever happen. We have to ask the motivation for why China is tacitly supporting Putin. And that tacit support is coming at a cost. And that tacit support will be, and the cost will be, access to natural resources and building up relationships to be able to use areas of Russia in the future. Now, we've got right out in the east, if we go back, last century before, Sino-Russian conflicts in Manchuria and elsewhere. And we've got the Russian Pacific port in Vladivostok. That is something that historically used to be under Chinese control. And that whole region of Russia used to be under Chinese control, used to belong to China. China's got ambitions to get it back again. So if we get the geopolitics wrong and there is a pivot to Southeast Asia, China is going to go and I think try and protect its investment in its natural resources and elsewhere in Russia. And that could see a land grab. That would be dangerous. A couple of final questions. Joshua comes in and says we cannot make concessions or take this alliance between Iran, Russia and North Korea. We see the Kremlin talking points in mainstream media about how their economy is great, and Russians living in Russia on YouTube saying that the economic collapse is imminent. And we're looking there at the true state of the Russian economy and the relationship in the Crink's alliance. So we've got in Crink's, we've got China, Russia, North Korea and Iran. That is an alliance that's growing stronger, and that's something that we have to be worried about. And we've seen that develop at the recent BRICS meeting and develop through that. BRICS' arrival to the G7, Crink. It's too early to say how that's going to go, but the motivation of the countries that are coming together in that is very different to, say, the motivation of the countries coming together in NATO. It's not a collective defence. This is a collective what we can get out of each other from an opportunistic perspective. So it's one to watch. It's one to be worried about, but not overly concerned about at the moment. And the Russian economy is in a wartime growth. We're seeing the economy growing up, but that's because an awful lot of Russian money is being invested inside Russia's industry, and you'll get this sort of artificial growth. The inflation rate, the bank interest rates and all the rest of it are starting to go through the roof. Mortgage rates are going through the roof and everything else. That's a precursor for a complete collapse in the Russian economy. So that's coming potentially at some time. And again, something we will watch very closely indeed. Well, I think that's all of the questions that we've got today. Subscribe to Times Radio to put your questions in. You can send questions through other routes, but the way to get them guaranteed answered is get them into the Times Radio subscription. I'm Philip Ingram. Thank you very much indeed for watching today.